The Portal series is something that needs no real introduction. It's a staple of modern video games and rightfully deserves its spot as a towering achievement of game design. The first Portal was released as part of the Orange Box in 2007, which is seen by many as one of the best values for a product in gaming history. Kind of insane now knowing what Valve has become that in 2007 you got a continuation of the Half-Life series, the long-awaited sequel to Team Fortress, and a brand new single-player IP all in the same package, sold at a normal price. Not to mention the previous two Half-Life releases. In 2007, Portal was the black sheep of this package. Valve were known for making shooters, oftentimes in a more classic style reminiscent of 90s PC FPS games. Portal was a short, tight puzzle game, and the idea was conceived by college students with their 2005 project Narbacular Drop. Like many Valve IPs, Valve saw potential in the project and hired the team responsible to do it in the Source engine. At some point in development, it was decided to set Portal in the Half-Life universe. It's mostly subtle in both games, but if you're perceptive, you can pick up on certain nods here and there, which have huge implications to the lore of both franchises. We'll get more into these later. The original Portal has aged gracefully. It is a famously short game, perhaps leaving you wanting a bit more. A pro of this approach is that there's absolutely no bloat within Portal. It's one of the most concise and fun all-around games that you can play. The shorter nature of the game lends to replay value as well. While of course, on multiple playthroughs you will have the test chamber solutions memorized, it becomes more of a challenge to the player to see how fast you can do it. This is no doubt why the game is famously popular in the speedrunning community. I haven't played Portal in a couple years, and it only took me about 70 minutes to beat for this video, going at a relatively casual pace. It's easier to forgive the game's short runtime when taking in the context of its release. At first, Portal was only available within the Orange Box. Valve kept the game's length lower as they weren't positive of the game's success and wanted it to go over well. Of course, as we all know in hindsight, Portal was the surprise success of the Orange Box and has gone on to have almost as much of a dedicated fanbase as Valve's other big single-player IP, Half-Life. So what was it that people fell in love with about Portal? You start in a sterile, futuristic room with everyone's favorite AI GLaDOS talking to the player. At first, to wrap the concept around the portals into your head, you can only go through portals the game has set for you. I remember when I played this game as a kid, I thought it was really cool to see your player model through the portals. Of course, that's inherent to the idea of the game, but I feel it certainly was an intentional move to see your player character through the first portal of the game. The early test chambers of the original Portal are designed to get you acquainted with the game's mechanics without removing any player control. This is a theme for Valve games, and certainly helps not only the gameplay, but the immersion as you slowly get absorbed in the interesting world of Portal and its one speaking character GLaDOS. Portal does a great job at introducing its mechanics in very simple early tests, only to take what you've learned and challenge you later by combining the mechanics and upping the difficulty. Perhaps the best example of this is the role momentum plays in these test chambers. It's introduced in a simple test chamber where just about anyone can figure it out, and once you have, the game begins using it in more creative ways, stacking with the other mechanics and creating a bigger challenge. For example, Test Chamber 18, one of the last ones, has a section where you must combine what the game has taught you about momentum with quick reflexes and skill over an insta-kill pit of sludge. It has an inherent sense of flow. There's even a couple examples of momentum giving you opportunities to take shortcuts within tests. Whether intentional or not, it's incredibly satisfying to pull off and repeat playthroughs. As you progress through the chambers, you start to notice that something's pretty off about the voice speaking to you the whole game, as well as the facility in general. The questions of where, why, and how aren't really answered for you, at least not in the first game, so you're relying on atmosphere and context clues based on what GLaDOS tells you. At first, you might even believe that she's not an AI at all. Perhaps this is just some automated system spewing pre-recorded messages at you. I assume this was an intentional design decision to make it that much more effective when she starts reacting to the things you're doing directly. There's one point where GLaDOS says this:
"The Enrichment Center is required to remind you that you will be baked, and then there will be cake."
This is one of those subtle lines to tell you that things aren't quite what they seem. There's also the Ratman dens, which infamously contain the most overused joke of all time. But the Ratman dens have a real purpose within the game's world to show you that you're not the only one in this situation. Portal does something really cool where the only motivation the game gives you is, aside from a bad meme, completely meaningless. The world it introduces and the fun, engaging gameplay is the motivation. You want to press on and see what happens next in this crazy facility. and the game doesn't need to give you a MacGuffin to chase to want to keep going. It does all this with a mute protagonist and only one other major character, and the finale it delivers is well worth pressing on for. I'll never forget the real oh shit feeling I got whenever I first got to this point in Portal. It's a well done moment, not because we didn't know she was going to kill us, we probably inferred that. It's a well done moment because of Portal's presentation. Once again refusing to take control away from the player, they have to think on their feet quickly to survive. It also helps that you get a total banger play. I guess now's as good a time as any to talk about Portal's, and by extension Valve's, audio design. Like Half-Life, music is sparse. There's only a handful of real tracks I can think of in Portal's soundtrack, but each of them is deployed at the perfect time, either adding to the ambience of the test chambers or providing a massive jolt in adrenaline in the bigger moments. Likewise, the sound effects are expertly crafted and make this futuristic sci-fi facility feel real. Valve's biggest strength in their design of single-player games is their commitment to immersion. When you inevitably meet GLaDOS face-to-face, it feels like a big moment because you're absorbed in the experience. The fight with GLaDOS is a fantastic way to end the game. It must have been pretty difficult to come up with a concept for a boss fight in a puzzle game, one that is perfectly fine with leaving the player character alone to their devices, but Valve exceeded here in providing an exciting conclusion to their product. The fight with GLaDOS is a nice balance of testing your understanding of the mechanics it's given you, while adding in some tension to up the adrenaline, like a final boss should. My favorite part of this last section of the game is the way GLaDOS reacts to you, and almost becomes more human as you get closer to her, until she flat out berates you during the battle.
You survived this long because I was curious about your behavior. You managed to destroy that part of me. Unfortunately, as much as I would love to now, I can't get the neurotoxin into your head any faster. I'd just like to point out that you were given every opportunity to succeed.
There's some of those aforementioned ties to the Half-Life universe here at the end too.
Things have changed since the last time you left the building. What's going on out there will make you wish you were back in here. I have an infinite capacity for knowledge, and even I'm not sure what's going on outside. All I know is I'm the only thing standing between us and them.
It's a satisfying conclusion while still adding enough what-ifs to give a sequel somewhere to go. So, Portal actually did really well, even by Valve's own standards, and with questions still left unanswered and characters left unexplored, Valve began working on Portal 2. Portal 2 was released in 2011 to rave reviews and became one of Valve's most successful games, selling over 4 million copies by the end of 2012. Just like the first game, it's universally beloved by just about anyone who's played it. What did Valve do here that made it such a success? The Half-Life games were immersive, story-driven, linear FPS action games with an unmatched attention to detail. Portal 1 was an experiment. Even though the world and characters were intriguing, they weren't fleshed out yet. Portal 2 addresses this in spades. Set in an unknown but likely far-off time after the events of Portal 1, Portal 2 is a bigger and significantly more story-driven game than its predecessor. Similar to the Half-Life series, its plot is ultimately what drives you forward within the game. That's not to say the game isn't mechanically in-depth, because it's also more fleshed out gameplay-wise than its predecessor. Usually, when a sequel comes out that's generally agreed to be better than the original, it's because it's basically the same game but with a few improvements that make it stand out. Portal 2 isn't even that. These are very different games based around a similar gameplay loop. Something really cool they did to hype up the release of Portal 2 was to give Portal 1 an update changing the ending. Before this update, it's assumed that Shell presumably escapes the facility, making it hard to set up a sequel with our main protagonist from the first game. But the update shows that Shell got dragged back into the facility, setting up the events of Portal 2. The first important thing you see in Portal 2 is a completely new character. Wheatley, voiced by Stephen Merchant, is the comedic standout of the game. Anyone who's seen the Ricky Gervais show will recognize his voice instantly. It was a great choice.
Do you understand what I'm saying at all? Does any of this make any sense? Just tell me, just say yes. Okay, what you're doing there is jumping. You just jumped?
Wheatley wakes you from your slumber that lasts, well, we don't know how long, but likely at least a few hundred years. After this, you get to see the shape of the facility after the downfall of GLaDOS in the beginning of the game. It's a really cool move to reuse some of the very first chamber's layouts at the beginning here. You could see it as rehashing, but it not only works contextually and shows what the research facility has become, but it also works to get you accustomed to the puzzles of the game, as in the first game. So obviously GLaDOS has to come back, and it happens in pretty hilarious fashion in this game.
Oh, look at that! Turning. Ominous. But probably fine, as long as it doesn't start, moving up. Now. Escape pod. It's moving up. Okay, no, don't worry. I've got it. This should slow it down. No, makes it go faster. Uh-oh.
Power up initiated.
Okay, don't panic. All right, stop panicking. I can still stop this. Oh, there's a password. Okay, it's fine. I'll just hack it. Not a problem. C. Wait, did I do B? Do you have a pen? Start writing these down.
Power up complete.
Side note, am I the only one who thought the first time I played that she just straight up kills him here? When GLaDOS wakes up, it's back to testing just like the old days. Except the facility's pretty decrepit. I adore the visual style of Portal 2, and specifically these early levels. It holds up graphically, and I can't see it aging very much at all in the future. The source engine, though outdated, has proven to stand the test of time in many titles, but this is Valve's best looking source engine game in my opinion. It has a lot more variety than the first game, but still fits the vibe of Aperture Science established in that title. Anyway, GLaDOS is really funny in this first section when you're testing and she's in control. She just absolutely tears into shell here.
This next test involves turrets. You remember them, right? They're the pale spherical things that are full of bullets. Oh wait, that's you in 5 seconds. Good luck.
Wheatley begins to come back when she's not around, with some great lines here.
Hey, it's me! I'm okay!
Well, I'm back. The aerial faceplate in here is sending a distress signal. You broke it, didn't you? There, try it now.
What happened, right? I was just lying there? You thought I was done?
This plate must not be calibrated to someone of your generousness. I'll add a few zeros to the maximum weight. You look great, by the way. Very healthy. Try it now.
Hey, bird, right? Couldn't believe it either.
The two eventually are able to escape the test chambers and manage to cut the neurotoxin supply and render her turrets useless by changing the master turret to a defective one. This is a really fun section of the game that feels like you're really doing some damage to GLaDOS. Once you meet up with GLaDOS again, you get flashbacks of the first game, and it feels like you could be approaching the end. You manage to put Wheatley in GLaDOS' body, giving him control over the entire facility. Things seem to be going well until he runs mad with power, and it's revealed he's actually an intelligence dampening sphere, designed to be a moron, and you just put him in charge of the facility.
Good, that's still working.
He puts GLaDOS inside a potato battery and punches you deep into Aperture's lowest depths. You're just getting started. As a jaded adult, it's hard not to see this coming, but when I first played this game as a kid, it was a big moment that I will always remember. Something so striking to me ever since I was a kid about this section of the game is the sheer scale of Aperture. I could be wrong, but it seems even more massive than Black Mesa is. Going to the bottom of the facility and working your way up is a really interesting part of the game. For a while down here, you don't have GLaDOS or Wheatley, and it's the first time in this series where you feel actually lonely. You don't have any characters speaking to you for a little bit here, and then you're introduced to Cave Johnson. Cave Johnson is the CEO of Aperture who passed away in the 1980s, so way before the events of this game. You've come to know about Cave Johnson through pre-recorded messages that play through old test chambers you find near the bottom of the facility. These messages start with the 60s, where Cave Johnson is optimistic and full of energy. As you progress, however, Cave Johnson's messages from the 70s and 80s become more pessimistic as business isn't doing so well, and he gets deathly ill from moon rock poisoning. There's a really nice touch during these sections where the loading screens change Aperture logos as you go through different eras of test chambers in Cave Johnson's recordings. Eventually, you find GLaDOS again, still in a potato battery, and now the two of you have a common goal: get revenge on Wheatley before he destroys the facility with his incompetence. When GLaDOS hears the recordings from Cave Johnson, she seems to recognize him and another character, Johnson's secretary Caroline. When Cave begins rambling about putting a man's intelligence on a compact disc, he states that if he dies before they figure out how to put him in a computer, that he wants Caroline to run the place instead. The pieces start to build here, and you begin to realize that GLaDOS started as the AI built from Caroline and her personality traits. Eventually you find Wheatley again, who's built a new type of box with legs to solve tests for him because he can't find any test subjects. Turns out GLaDOS's body, the one Wheatley is in, has a euphoric response to testing, and Wheatley is now obsessed with testing. He then forces Chell to complete many more tests until he can find a replacement. Eventually he finds Atlas and Peabody, two robots built specifically for testing, and tries to kill Chell and GLaDOS because he doesn't need them to do test chambers anymore.
Hello, this is the part where I kill you.
This moment is fantastic and exemplifies something really cool and funny about Portal 2's story. There's many instances in Portal 2's campaign where no input from the player or a very specific input incites a seemingly endless amount of unique dialogue from the playable characters. For example, here where Wheatley tries to kill you, he will beg the player to come back, and if you do, will ask you to jump into the pit beneath you. You can really ride this out too.
Oh, you came back. I didn't plan for this. Can't reset the death trap. Could you just jump into that pit? Would you just jump into that pit for me? Would you just jump into that pit? There. That deadly pit. I'll tell you what's also down there. Your parents. And there's also an escape elevator. What's this? A lovely handbag. And the 3 portal device. Also, it's all down there. You've got yacht and boys. Loads of boys, fellas, hunky guys down there, possibly even a boyfriend. Who's to say? I'm not sure at this stage. But a lot of good-looking fellas down there, and a boy band as well that haven't seen a woman in years. And they're not picky at all. They don't care if you've got a bit of brain damage, if you've been running around, if you've been sweating, and a farm, a pony farm, and just jump down, would you? Oh wow, good. I didn't think that was gonna work.
The Wheatley section of the game also has this really charming thing you can do, where if you find out how to smash the monitors in the test chambers, you'll keep getting different reactions from him.
Oh, bless your little primate brain. I'm not actually in the room with you, am I? Technology. It's complicated. You can't hurt the big old god face. Do you know what I've got too many of around there? Monitors. I was actually thinking earlier today, I wish I had fewer monitors that were working. So you're just helping me really by smashing them. Okay, to clarify, I was being a little bit facetious about that wanting to get rid of monitors thing. They are actually really quite useful, so I do want them around. So if you could just avoid smashing them.
Once you escape from Wheatley's death trap, all that's really left to do is to find his lair.
Welcome to my lair.
The final boss with Wheatley is really fun and probably the hardest boss in the series. Whether or not you prefer Portal 1's final boss with GLaDOS will depend on subjective taste, but I like how Portal 2 does it better. It's almost an inversion of the form of the Portal 1 boss, where, as opposed to incinerating cores, you're adding corrupted cores to initiate a transfer, and put GLaDOS back in control. I'm realizing I forgot to touch on the cores in Portal 1. So I'll really quickly say that the cores in both games are really funny, and it's an interesting piece of lore to have these standalone robots that ultimately serve to affect GLaDOS's behavior. So right when Wheatley has the one-up on you, your portal gun is aiming right at the moon, and there's not much else to do other than try shooting it. I will say, it's kind of funny how no matter which portal you shoot, it turns out the same either way. I definitely don't blame them for this, but I always shoot the wrong portal just to do it. You get kind of a twisted, but ultimately tender moment with GLaDOS at the end. She calls you a friend before deleting Caroline and admitting that defeating you is hard, and it's easier to just let you go so you're out of the way. So that's exactly what she does, but not without giving you a turret opera. This field is so nice. It's always given me hope that somehow the Combine didn't completely destroy Earth, given that Portal 2 takes place way after the events of the Half-Life series. Portal also ends with Want You Gone, a nice pop rock number just like the original Portal. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about Still Alive. These songs are a bit corny, but I really do love them. They're charming. The game officially ends with a scene of Wheatley in space, seemingly apologetic for the chaos he's caused. It's hard for me not to feel a little bad for him here. He's one of the most likable villains I've ever experienced in any form of media. And he does seem just like a lovable idiot who had too much power and didn't know what to do with it. It's a wild ride for sure, and for a much longer game than the original, it breezes past you quickly. At the same time, the scope is increased tenfold when compared to the original. This is evident in the story, but it's also increasingly evident in the gameplay. Portal 2 adds a lot of new mechanics to the same ones you're intimately familiar with after the first game. There's turrets, cubes, buttons, and so on from the first game, but now we've also got light bridges, gels, aerial faith plates, redirection cubes, and the list goes on. These all work to make the core gameplay feel fresh, despite being similar in feel to the first. It also makes for the more advanced test chambers of the two games, especially in the later parts of the game. By far, my favorite introduction, and the one that changes the gameplay the most, is the new gels. You have Repulsion Gel, which makes you jump significantly higher and has a bouncy property to it, Propulsion Gel, which allows you to run at high speeds, and Conversion Gel, which can make any surface a portal surface. Conversion Gel is the least flashy of all of them, but it's incredibly useful. It's actually how you're able to end up defeating Wheatley in the end. These all come together to add a deeper layer to puzzles, and the visual spectacle as well is incredibly satisfying. A small but very much appreciated improvement over the gameplay of Portal 1 is the very slight but noticeable automation of going through portals at high speeds. In Portal 1, there's no such system in place, so you're better off just shooting a portal right before you land. But in Portal 2, the game sort of homes you into it as you get closer. It's not often that a game in the first person is able to pull off something like high speed or high jumps with grace, but once again Portal 2 exceeds expectations in this regard. I touched briefly on the graphics already, but the presentation as a whole is fantastic in Portal 2. The title screen changes just as the loading screens do, depending on where you are in the game on your last save file. The sound design is even more immaculate than the first Portal game. Ambient music layers will come in and out as you use the gels or activate a laser. It's dynamic and serves in making the facility feel alive. There's also just a lot more music in general, probably due to the game itself being about 3 times longer than the original. The entire soundtrack is available for free online, and it's really fantastic. It has a little bit of that Kelly Bailey industrial Half-Life sound, but it's really its own thing, creating an atmosphere that works in tandem with the game's visuals to bring Aperture to life. There's even a little turret choir hidden in this room. There's a lot of little hidden Easter eggs and things like this. By far, my favorite is the dock you can access with the lifebuoy that says Borealis on it. A really neat callback to Half-Life 2 Episode 2. There's also the part where GLaDOS says she saw some humans outside.
Well, you passed the test. I didn't see the deer today. I did see some humans. But with you here, I've got more test subjects than I'll ever need.
This could be just a mess with Shell, but if not, who did she see? There's also this.
And you most likely used one of the many products we invented, but that other people have somehow managed to steal from us. Black Mesa can eat my bankrupt...
There's many more examples, like seeing Wheatley peek through the walls and floor, and even the really creepy noises you hear when you get close to this one particular wall. This is supposedly Doug Ratman, who is a character I will touch on briefly. There's so much lore here that you're probably better off looking into it yourself, but here's what I remember. Doug Ratman was an employee of Aperture who survived GLaDOS flooding the enrichment center with neurotoxin, and is alive during the events of Portal 1. You can find his dens in both games, which have his scribblings and graffiti on them. He's not seen in-game in either Portal, but he is said to have been watching from the shadows during the events of the first game. In between portals, he makes his escape, but comes back in the facility after seeing that Shell's been dragged in. He gets shot by some turrets in the process and goes into cryogenic stasis himself, inside the same bed as Shell comes out of in the first game. He's not seen in it in Portal 2, so his fate is unknown, leaving us to wonder if we really hear him in Portal 2 at all. Maybe it's a ghost? Or even just part of the soundtrack? All of this info comes from the webcomic Lab Rat that was released in between games to hype Portal 2. It's well worth a look if you're into the lore of the series at all. The Portal series makes me happy anytime I play it. I can go through either of them anytime, and even if I know exactly what's coming ahead, it's just as fulfilling in every run through. It's one of those series that's absolutely going to stand the test of time and be talked about for decades to come. Both games have a striking atmosphere and engaging gameplay that is not really rivaled by another game series. It's by far one of the most unique and interesting video game series of all time, but it manages to strike a mainstream appeal all the same. Both games are inherently designed to draw people in and keep them there. And Portal 2 specifically is one of those games that makes a place up in your head and just stays there. And there's something special about a game that can do that. I'm hoping to make more videos on the Portal and Half-Life series, as I really could go on forever about them. So if that's something you'd like to see, please let me know in the comments. I'd also like to take a second to quickly thank you guys for watching before I sign off. The support and criticism on the last 2 video essays was much appreciated, and I'm really excited to keep this channel moving. Thanks for watching.